Okay, so I grew up in the town, a place called Burt. It would be known. It's on the main road from, I suppose, Derry to Letterkenny, uh, about 2 miles from the frontier town, as it was called, of Bridgend. Uh, it'll be known as for the famous, I suppose, Green and Navalia Fort and St Angus's Church at the bottom of the hill. So yeah, in many ways, the border dominated my life, my right up teenage years, and really until I suppose left home when I was about 17. So it was a huge part of my life. So we lived, as the crow flies, we lived 2 mile from it by road. Going the main road was it would be about 3 miles to Bridgend. So it's pretty much part of my life.
And would you be crossing over and back the border regularly?
Yeah, we did. I had an aunt in Derry, like a lot of people live in the border area. They have relatives on both sides of it, so we were regularly in to see her. Uh, I suppose, really, we are talking. I'm 60 now, so you talk about 69. So the troubles, so the border, not just in terms of customs, but in terms of, militarization was very much part of it. But yes, had probably the troubles not been at begin or at in the late 60s, I probably would have gone to school in Derry, because I ultimately went to school in Buncrana and Falcara before that. But I think that Derry would have been the obvious place to go to school, and many people did. I mean, my uncles and other ones that did go on to second level school did go to school in Derry. Was so yes, I mean it was daily. I remember also even from school we used to go in times to the swimming pool, which is just about a mile back from the border at Templemore Sports Complex. So yeah, it's just like I often think our own daughters now have no idea of what it is for checkpoints, customs posts. So sometimes you had three things. You'd have a customs post in the south, customs post in the north, and you'd have an army checkpoint and possibly a guarded checkpoint.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
My own memory, in the late 30s, is the Free State Customs Post.
Yes.
I don't remember a customs post on the other side.
Well, that's interesting. When I was thinking about this, and when you are focusing on customs as opposed to the army or the guards, is that so. Yeah, so my earliest memories are very much of the Free State, to use that word, customs posts, because so when I went from Burt to Buncrana to school, we got a bus that took us to Bridgend, which is that little village on the border, and we had to wait there to get another bus. And in the village of Bridgend, you had what we'd call sort of the heavy duty customs post, or the more, I suppose, more commercial one, that was actually in the village of Bridgend. And I remember, because there were no bus shelters in those days, and you wore duffel coats and you got soaked, and there were no waterproof coats. But I remember the kindness of them. We were let stay in the lobby of the customs uh, house there in Bridgend, actually in the village. So we got to know them. It was just a place to shelter. But then you went, what would it be, a few hundred meters up the road, and you actually came to the Irish Customs frontier post. So I think sometimes, so I don't know about the logistics of it, but one was basically to stop your car and checking for, taking stuff illegally. The other one was more commercial, if you were importing a car. So it was kind of like bigger lorries or stuff, and it involved much more paperwork. So I think it is important to remember there were two customs posts.
That's the clear memory I have. Obviously, the clear memory of the Coshquin military
Yeah.
site, but I remember that the building's still there. Obviously, the customs building, the old one.
Yes.
And then there was a little green hut. This would be late 80s, early 90s, my memory. So,
yes.
Is that what you're talking about? There was a little
no.
hut on the road, and then there was.
So no. So there was. So let me think where it is. So in the middle of near where the Frontier Bar is, aptly named Frontier Bar, there was a building there that was, and so they didn't wear uniform. customs people, but they weren't. They were like kind of behind the scenes doing paperwork and doing larger things and whatever like that there. And then you got the one up the road, which the building is still there, the fairly robust building beside the Green Inn Hotel, and that was where the customs officers were in uniform, but they were the same customs. One just dealt with kind of cars and day-to-day stuff. The other stuff was kind of like bigger stuff. But then just like 50 yards, literally, because the border is just from that uniform customs post, the border is what, 20, 30 yards. Just so if it's on the right as you're going into Derry, the Irish one, you go another 50, 100 yards max. On the left-hand side, there was the British or the Northern Irish customs post there. They were based there.
Where would that have been in relation to where I'm thinking about when there was the army checkpoint?
So it's long before you come to that. So if you know there's a kind of, I always sort of like a no man's land of, there's a place for rental and there's a sign up if you need a Northern Ireland address. So it's just there. It is almost on the border.
For that industrial estate?
Exactly. But before you come to it, like it's not up near Barney's checkpoint, is that we always called it Barney's where the army were. So it's there. So in a sense you had 3 customs posts, you know. So that was one of my memories of the physicality of the customs post.
And that's the main road, obviously, from
yeah.
that part of Donegal into Derry.
Yeah.
There's another set of roads up the back of Burt.
Yes,
now,
yes.
There was no customs infrastructure there, was there?
No. So I remember those roads before they became what we would have called unapproved roads. I think behind Burt, behind my home house, there were probably 4 or 5 roads could get you in there, between that and Calais or Carrigan's. I remember them when you could drive them. Well, you can drive them now. I remember them then when they were either they sometimes put concrete bollards, people call dragon's teeth, or some of them were cratered. But I think mostly around where we lived, as opposed to Monaghan or places where they blew up bridges. These were roads that weren't bridges. They put up these concrete. Now you could go through them on a bicycle, and they were there. And I also remember when they came down, but we used to call them unapproved roads. That was now what you would get sometimes because we would have been up there a good bit cycling and gone up to Green Inn and that, you would get mobile customs patrols, you know, from the south, you know, and they would patrol and you would see people in occasionally, but they tended not to be out and about that much. But we were aware of mobile. I mean, I knew some people that were mobile customs officers, you know, went around in cars.
So was that how it worked then? If you went through the approved route for your declared goods?
Absolutely.
Something to declare?
Yeah.
If you felt like not declaring something, you could have gone on the
unapproved
route.
You could have.
You might have been stopped then by mobile patrol.
Yeah, and the other thing is, you know, it wasn't just customs. I mean, you get a multiplicity then of, you know, guards, Irish Army on the side, you know, British Army and RUC are on the other side. So I mean, like those roads where you just didn't know. I mean, I remember I used to see Irish Army patrols up there. And you have to remember, you know, there's a whole context to this, Adrian. I think that, I was thinking about this the last day, and that if you know where Burnfoot Garda Station was, I think at one stage there were about, maybe not all on duty at the one time, but there were about 80 guards based out of there. It was huge. It's huge. And, you know, so like when I was growing up, there weren't as many, I suppose, migrants or modern blow-ins, you know, that had come to there. So the 2 accents that you would have got that weren't Burt accents were either in the guards or were in the customs. And so there were a lot of people living about. The guards had accommodation provided for some of them. Then others got rented. I think customs didn't. You had to get your own house, as far as I understand. You know, you weren't provided with accommodation. But like the accents in Burt that weren't from Burt, or indigenous to Burt, if you want that word, where you just knew they were a customs man. They were well. I do remember a few customs women, but it was mostly men. And you got to, because they were the only kind of outsiders that were living in the area at that time. It's very different now. I mean, I haven't lived there a long time. I can think of the likes of people like, I say their name. We were friendly with family. Leo Tuffy, now sadly dead. And the customs Pat Fanning. These were acts in Sligo or Dublin or whatever. That were, and I think one of the beneficiaries was, I was thinking about this, was the local, because hurling was big in Burt, as opposed to, hurling and Gaelic to a lesser extent benefited, because suddenly you could have had somebody from Kilkenny, great hurling county, living in the area. And they did really take part in, they married local women, they lived, so, I've good memories of them, I have to say. Kindliness, never fear.
What the question I was going to ask you was because Burt is such a hurling stronghold in many shows, one of the only ones. So I wonder, was that the reason? I'm sure it probably was.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think even to this day, there are some people involved in it that would have worked in obviously don't exist anymore, are retired. But there's no doubt about it that people there was always somebody. I think particularly customs nearly more than guards. Strangely enough, maybe being a customs man, because you felt easier to kind of get involved or something. Maybe the guard. I don't know. I don't know the actual, the numbers, but certainly I remember, PG, I can't remember his name, but I think of the Leo Tuffys and as I say, the Pat Fannings. And for me, it was interesting as a 12-year-old to be sheltered at the custom post and to hear accents. That was my first time I'd probably heard. I'd never been abroad. I'd never, hadn't been in Dublin much when you're, in the sort of 60s, late 60s. So there was something almost slightly exotic about it,
Maybe I'm going back too far now in asking this question, but do you remember the unapproved roads before they were?
Oh yeah, yes, I do. You would have
been probably like younger.
Yeah. But I do remember, that was I do remember driving them, and then I remember, when they were blocked, and it was really interesting, and word went round. Also something, I served a bit of a while I was a priest in Derry and Cregan. So Cregan was directly behind Burt, and I sometimes would have cycled home just on my day off for a day, and I was able to come through because it's not as if it's they weren't manned. You were allowed to go through them. They couldn't stop. But on a bicycle, I would have cycled through these big bollards, but you couldn't take a car or even a motorbike. But I do remember it before. But I have a very strong memory of the time that the infamous bomb was at the Three Flowers at Barney's checkpoint, as we called it. And I was at home that time, and we had heard a noise during the night, and we didn't know till next morning, what the horror that had happened there. But the point I was going to make about that is that was closed, that road then, that the main road we're talking about, where the customs posts were, into Derry. And so I either had to get into Derry, I had to go to Muff, or I had to go to Carrigan's. Now, it's not a huge, but when you're used to a short hop in, at the time I felt the border became very real. I felt cut off. Suddenly it wasn't easy to get. Now, you always had the difficulty of, used to say to our girls, you wouldn't know how long if you're leaving Derry or vice versa, how your journey would take. So it's probably, driving it's 10 minutes, but it could have taken an hour, depending on what was happening at the checkpoint. But I remember when that happened that time, I felt very, I felt cut off, sort of cut off from your hinterland.
I can imagine, because this project is looking at the centenary of the customs post being placed there. I can imagine the impact at the time must have been immense on border.
No.
And then, 1st of April 1923,
Yeah.
all of a sudden,
Yeah.
there were guards on both sides.
Absolutely.
Customs officers on both
Yeah.
sides, and
Yeah.
huts being built, and
Yeah.
confusion over what you could and couldn't take over and back.
Absolutely.
You lived through early part of your life a shift and a change on
Yes.
the border, because
Yes.
militarization of the border happened at that time.
Yeah.
But you can imagine the 50 years before that.
Oh yeah, and like I suppose I grew up. My mother had an uncle, Charlie Friel from Fanad, and he was a custom man. He was in Pettigo, and so I kind of always grew up with the folk that I kind of had almost a glamour. There was something about uniforms, and they weren't military, but they were, they were very thick black coats, gold thing, and a white cap. And I had my grandfather was a lighthouse keeper, and something similar to that. So, but you're right. It must have been a huge change. Uh, I mentioned that the border influenced. So I can't think how this worked, but that take. There was one stage that a coalition government. I need to check if you know who it was. They basically fell on a VAT on children's shoes. I can't. Maybe it was a coalition government, maybe Gareth Fitzgerald and Labour or something, and so there was high VAT imposed on children's shoes, and I remember the people called barbers that actually, it's that big filling station. I still call it barbers, but they've fast food places and all that now.
At the White House.
At the White House, they were people always got to use the border. It was like, is the diesel or petrol cheaper in the north or is it the south? But just behind Bridgend, and it was an unapproved road. They got I don't know, one of those kind of containers, lorry containers, and they opened up a shoe shop. And I remember my mother taking us there to get shoes because the shoes were cheaper, and they were only, and there's nothing illegal about that. Well, I don't think they could check you for shoes. I don't know. I don't know enough about VAT and tax and how customs work, but it was interesting how the border worked, in that it was kind of, I have a very big recall of it. I thought, and since that I thought, God, that's how people work. Borders will be held to somebody, but somebody else will make a packet out of it.
Well, I'm doing a bit of research for this.
Yeah.
I saw a newspaper article from the early 90s. It was the late 90s, and it was the new Labour government that put more duty on fuel.
Yeah.
And that was when the Bridgend became almost a
Yeah.
petrol station.
Yes.
And there was a picture
Yeah.
of the little garage there in the corner when you're driving the road to Buncrana.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
It was the fellas that owned that had a bottle of champagne and champagne flutes.
Yeah.
The front page of the Journal
Yes.
Gordon Brown.
Yes. Well,
So
yeah.
they had just made a complete
Incredible.
incredible.
Yeah. I remember one time years ago, we went to, I was on holidays with our family and in-laws, and we went to Lavinio, which is kind of between Italy and Switzerland. And they had some sort of, I don't know, like tax-free or, one of these kind of zones. But I remember looking at shops, and they were full. There was just two things: boxes and crates of sugar, because sugar must have been cheaper in one place. So I remember at the time thinking. I remember saying to my wife, I said, "This is just like Bridgend, except maybe it was fuel or whatever." And so yeah, but I mean, it's kind of, it is strange for me to think about. Our children now, they have no idea what customs are, the physicality of being stopped. I mean, there's a certain, obviously, even on my Father's Day, a romanticization of, smuggling. I mean, smuggling, there's lots written and all about that, and, stories and bravado, but it was kind of benign and, sort of like Flann O'Brienish, it wasn't, people smuggling butter and all of that, but obviously, there is a kind of well, one needs to be careful what to say about border. Wasn't it somebody talked about border people are from the border counties, or as if they're, and I'm very proud of being from where I'm from, and but it certainly was a huge part of my life, um, customs. And I remember even the first time there was a woman came there, and I think she married a local. He was a customs man too, but I remember seeing a woman in customs in a uniform, you know. And if I asked some of my sister or some of the people, they would know. I mean, she still lives there, but you know, I'm so long away now. But it was a big thing to see a woman in it, you know. And I remember even when I was doing my leaving cert, I thought, will I apply for the customs? Because it was kind of a good sort of job, and you kind of knew what it was, you know. Um, and you know, then you know, it was the usual thing. Sometimes some people would be known as, oh, they'll come out and stop you. Others would just wave you on, you know. Same with police or anything. You know, there's people who were more diligent maybe than others. But and you know, people got known as being a you know a shark or a, oh God, he's on today, or you know, or she's on. And you know, it's just yeah, a lot of those names are yeah still there. Good memories.
Yeah. I suppose just to finish up, Liam, do you have memories then of when the customs posts came down or when they were taken away? That would have been around the mid or around about the early 90s when was it the Maastricht Treaty?
Yeah, yeah, it was. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a certain irony in this, and I can't think of exact dates. I'm never really good in dates, so that's why I thought I was storing. But I was working in television at that stage, just started with Joe Mahon and Dennis Bradley, and there was a program made. It actually would be worth checking out, and it was about the lifting of that with the treaty and the disappearance of the of the customs posts. Now, what I recall at the time, the frontier one went, in other words, the one that stopped you, but the other one that was in the village, it still existed for you know for certain things. So, but and at the time, you know, hearing you know were people laid off or did they get redundancy or you know there's quite a bit of that. So in a sense, after that, the uniforms went. You know, I don't think I ever seen a uniformed customs person. There were people worked for revenue, customs, and excise, I think, um, which was interesting. I mean, the difference on what a customs is and an excise. I mean, so it's one's internal, isn't it, and one's external, and so yes, so that was a big thing. But of course the military still was there. You know what I mean? So
would have had a bigger impact if it had happened later on.
Yes, yes.
It was another 5 or 6 years.
It was. Aye, exactly. So you know, customers were gone, but the border was still there.
And the real stoppage
yeah.
was the army.
Yeah, oh, it was. Yeah, and I mean, the big queues ever were always the army. I mean, the customs never, you know, would have held people back that long. But I mean, I've, you know, huge memories of you know, even lifting friends and going out to the what do you call the place down at Quigley's Point, the nightclub, Point Inn, you know, and like cars going back, and I was driving maybe and let everybody else out to walk home because they've been quicker walking because you're in a queue, you don't know how long it's going to be, and somebody's pulled in, and you just, you know, I mean, huge. You could never organise your like if you were starting at 8 o'clock somewhere, you know, your time wasn't your own really, and that was, and you know, I can't remember back now, but you know, we even got to, you know, memories of certain regiments were stricter than others. The Royal Anglian weren't. You know what I mean? You know that would have been you know, the word would go round that oh, there's a new regiment and they're much stricter than the others. So there was all that. You know, there was all that. But for me, it was all border. You know, it was just you know this kind of unnatural thing is kind of there in that sense. You know. I mean, we sometimes take students now, and you'd say, you know, how do you know? Well, the signs changed to kilometres from imperial measurements. Very, very difficult. I mean, I know where the border is. You know, I know where the river is, and I know, or the burn there. But you know, other than that, you know, it's very difficult to say. Yeah.
Liam, thanks very much. That's really, really helpful.
No worries. No worries.